guys. Welcome back to the Diesel Performance Podcast. Co-host Chris Ehmke, and I'm here with Nick Priegnitz. Nick, what are you doing in here today?
Good question, Chris. Paul asked me a week ago, he said, hey, man, I'm on vacation. I need a little break from the podcast. I got some other stuff I got to take care of. Do you think you can stand in for me? Yeah. So I decided to make a little list of episodes that I would like to see, and so I thought maybe I'd join you for the next few.
I appreciate you taking some time. I know you're busy over at Calibrated doing a bunch of cool stuff over there, and, carving some time to be able to come on the show and do some brainstorming with me on a couple cool ideas that, honestly, Paul and I wouldn't have been able to come up with on our own. So, thanks for filling in.
My pleasure. First episode we got is talking with Wherli. So a few months ago, Wherli brought some nice cast parts to our shop. Not that he hasn't had good, nice cast parts in the past, but these were particularly impressively engineered, and just the attention to detail that's in this latest stuff I thought was really cool. And so I thought it would be cool to have Jason on the show, kind of talk about some of these new parts.
Well, we had the opportunity. They came in and did like a dealer training with us, and talked about some of the parts that they've been manufacturing for years, right? Intakes and different Y-bridge options and stuff like that. And I guess as an enthusiast, not just working in the industry, but as an enthusiast in the space, you see a part that's been around for years and you think, well, it's been around, it's good. How are you going to be able to re-engineer it and make it better? Yeah. And Jason spent an hour with a couple of the other guys at Wherli at the shop, kind of displaying and showing some of that stuff. And then more or less opening us up to what possibilities there are to improve on something that's been around for years. Yeah. So, let's talk about, when we look at parts as a reseller shop, right? Like, we're a tuning shop, we're a turbo shop, and we sell some of Wherli's parts in tandem with our products, right? Yeah. So they're bolt-on product for our parts that complement nice. And when I'm looking at parts that I want to add to our catalog, obviously I'm looking at performance, right? I want to make sure that the parts perform, improve the performance of all the parts that we sell, right? Like, I don't want to sell something that's not going to make extra power, not going to improve response, run a cleaner truck, et cetera, right? But there's other pieces of the puzzle, over and above performance when it comes to aftermarket automotive parts. You want to jump in on stuff that, what do you think, Chris? Consistency? Quality? I think that, reliability, right? You're talking about something being on a truck for years, right? Or the simple fact of, the products, I know that what we offer, things have changed in the sense of we need this one part to work in a multifaceted state, right? You want it to work on a stock truck. You want to be able to work on aftermarket. You want to be able to improve on the performance and the operation of the truck without complicating the operation.
Right. I don't want to pigeonhole the customer into having to get specific tuning or a specific turbo or specific other parts to go along with it. Yeah. So that modularity across the platform, I would say, is really important. That I consider it beefy flanges. That's like how I think about it in my mind. I'm like, how thick are the fucking flanges and the gaskets and the hardware? Because that's what's going to determine if the guy has leaks 70,000 miles from now.
That's true.
Right? And I hate dealing with that stuff. Yeah. I don't like troubleshooting it. I know it makes my turbos and my tuning run worse when we have exhaust leaks and intake leaks.
Of course.
I hate
they're
that
never
stuff.
able to operate correctly.
Exactly, right? So that's one of the big things I look for. Okay. And then ability to service the market, like, Wherli's casting these parts. He's got a huge powder coat shop. He'll be on in a minute here, but he can tell you all about the size of the shop. The shop is impressive. It's enormous. The stuff's in stock now, or it's close to being in stock. Right. Turnaround time is short. You're going to get the same part every time. The machines over there are pretty impressive too. So those are all the things that I saw when he came in, and I thought it was pretty impressive operation.
It definitely ramped up some of what we recommend and offer at the shop, right? Because we found this new interest of, hey, this is what's on the shelf, this is what's available to ship, this is what we have in our inventory, this is going to work on a stock truck, this is going to work and complement the turbos and things like that, right? So it was a collective effort at that point to be able to offer our customer base a little bit more than what we were able to offer in the past. Yeah.
Well, should we bring Wherli on? Have him tell a little bit about? Yeah, he's listened to us talk about him enough. So, all right, Jason, you're on, bud. Welcome to welcome to the podcast. We had you in a couple months ago. You showed us all sorts of new cool Y bridges, intakes, basically high flow parts that you guys are working on. Why don't you dive in a little bit? Tell us what's new and improved lately.
Yeah, so everything you've been talking about is essentially products we've offered for many years. some pieces that we've had from the very beginning, 12, 13-year-old products from when the business first started. And over the last couple of years, we brought a lot of new talent on board in regards to our engineering department and a lot of new processes in-house with our new facility. And we went back to the drawing board and we looked at a lot of our legacy products, a lot of our original stuff, and we looked at it and tried to think, how can we make things better? How can we revamp some stuff and make it work better with the factory truck, factory tuning in the cases where a customer doesn't have tuning. 10 years ago, things were a little bit different, and you didn't have to worry so much about things working on a bone stock truck because the trucks then, people were tuning them and doing things that you can't do so much of these days.
Yeah.
And
I'm going to pause you right there, Jason, because I remember 10 years ago you made intakes for us for the LBZ, and I said, can you try and make it so that the mass airflow sensor reads perfectly on a stock truck so I don't have to tune it? And you were like, no, I can't. I will send you the MAF sensor. I'll send you the intake, and you can figure it out. Tell what
Yep.
But I think back then too, Jason was doing a bunch of those, but I always remember WCFab being a twin turbo company. Doing compound turbo kits constantly.
Yeah. That was.
Yeah, we definitely started with the really high performance stuff and worked backwards, I guess you could say, to components that worked on stock vehicles that didn't throw service engine lights and didn't require tuning. When we first started, I think everything we made probably required tuning in some way, shape, or form, because we didn't have the engineering capacity that we have today, and because we were building a lot of turbo kits at that time where you had to have tuning. So it was just kind of a known fact. If you're buying one of our products, you need tuning. And the landscape has changed over the years. The customer base, the trucks, every year the trucks get a little smarter. More sensors. The computers are running much bigger algorithms between multiple sensors, and things got to be dialed in perfect. And if your MAF sensor is not a couple percentage of airflow within the factory readings, it's just not going to be happy. The truck's going to throw lights. It's going to throw codes that don't even make sense to the air intake. It's going to have EGR codes, exhaust DPF codes. All kinds of problematic things can happen just from a mass airflow sensor that's not readed properly. So it became more important as the years went on that we redevelop some of this product and make it work on a stock application bolt on and not require tuning.
Now, was there a specific platform that made you kind of think back of like, hey, we need to revisit the older platforms? Like, was there one truck where you guys were doing your intakes a certain way and it just kept kicking you in the rear to kind of make you revisit the entire product line?
I like your question, Chris. I think I don't know that it was one truck, though. I think there might be another.
I guess we'll find out.
Hey, let's hear it. What exactly put you down the road to redemption here, Wherli?
Yeah, so things, as we said, things were a lot easier 10 plus years ago. You could literally build an intake system for an LB7, and hell, you could practically put the MAF sensor anywhere you wanted, and it was close enough it would work. Certainly there was areas it worked better than others, but back then it was pretty simple. The trucks, the computers were pretty dumb, and they didn't really care much. You could notice some throttle sensitivity gains or decreases if you had it placed in the wrong spot, but it wasn't near as sensitive as, let's say, the L5P platform. And as years went on, it got to be more problematic. Just like you said, you asked us, hey, can you build us an intake that has a MAF sensor reading like factory so we don't got to tune differently for your intake? And it was like, at the time, no, you just kind of got to deal with it. But when we started building intakes for the LML and definitely for when the L5P came out, we learned real quick that these things are not going to tolerate a misplaced sensor. And the L5P in particular, because it took, 3 years before we could tune them, there was a big gap there where we essentially couldn't make intakes or sell intakes for them without them working perfect because there was no tuning available for that platform. And for the first couple of years, it was kind of the thought that there's never going to be tuning available for the L5P. And, with that in mind, it's like, well, we can't just stop developing product for new trucks. We got to figure this out. So that's when we started really doing our homework and digging deeper with scan tools and with flow bench and, and software for airflow and understanding the mass airflow sensor and working with Nick and Calibrated and getting the mass airflow placement figured out to replicate the factory readings and offer a product that could be bolt on, because we were essentially at the assumption we weren't going to be able to tune those trucks.
Let's talk about that process a little bit, Wehrli, because I think the listeners are probably curious about what that looks like. I mean, you come to me, you say, hey, or we talk together, right? And I'm like, hey, it'd be really in your best interest to build an intake that doesn't have mass airflow issues, and which compound into EGR issues and eventually DPF issues. We're in agreement, but coming up with that process to build that intake, that's not exactly something that Joe Schmo in his garage is going to do. You want to talk a little bit about the process of backing into that and what kind of hurdles you guys had to jump through to build an intake that flows or that shows a mass airflow reading the same as stock?
Yeah, it was definitely a learning curve for us. We're fabricators, we're welders, we're not electrical engineers, and we had some learning to do in regards to how the mass airflow sensor works, how the EGR flow, EGR valve position, how all that plays into effect on the mass airflow reading, and the grams of airflow at idle, at part throttle, at transient throttle, while you're accelerating, while you're decelerating. There's so many different positions in the throttle position, and then throwing in correlation to the EGR, where you really got to keep a tight spec and all that. So it was a major learning curve. We did it with the L5P. We went through a lot of revisions until we got something that worked, and then we kind of worked backwards from there, going back to the LML and then the LMM, LBZ, and so on and so forth, to redesign all those older intakes with the same mindset that we used on the L5P to get them to work without having to have tuning.
Yeah.
So it was definitely a big step for us to be able to offer essentially a product line for intake systems on a model year Duramax and all model year Cummins, where we can confidently say you can bolt them on and not have mass airflow codes.
Yeah, right on. Thanks for laying that out. I mean, I know I talked to one of your engineers for quite a while about using the airflow bench, about calibrating for a certain airflow on the airflow bench, and then looking back at the frequency of the mass airflow sensor to try and make sure that lined up.
We not only we use both tools actually. We not only did the testing on the truck, because the truck is going to flow different depending on again where the EGR flow is at. So that's a whole other level of the equation, where on the flow bench you can look at the mass airflow via the air flowing through the intake at a given grams per second, but that can bring into the equation what the difference of the EGR makes. So the testing starts out on the flow bench, and we get something close, but you can still have some weird things go on the truck, and because of the emissions components and everything else that comes into play, that's not something you can duplicate on the flow bench exactly.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you laying that out. I think that the second, I would say the biggest validation tool we have is something that I don't think you guys have talked about on the podcast yet here, and that's Performance Test Lab.
Oh yeah.
Which is a collaboration between Wherli and I, where we have a 5-gas analyzer and a team of guys who are dedicated to doing emissions performance testing.
I think you bring up that topic, right?
Yep.
And it's something that Paul and I have always kind of shied away from not bringing up or bringing to the surface. But I guess I have a question. We'll start with Jason, and then I want to ask you this. As these platforms have progressed and as some of the laws have become a little bit more strict, what's changed as far as being able to offer a product, a new platform to the market space, right? Like, clearly you guys saw a reason or the importance of having a test lab in some fashion, and there's a reasonable basis around that stuff. But, Jason, for you to be able to build a twin turbo kit 10 years ago, or to, make an air intake and just go to sell it to now, what's some of the hurdles and what are some of the changes as the, as the industry is shaped up and matured?
Yeah, the landscape of the industry, obviously, we've talked about before on the podcast, with other Gus and myself, in regards to just the last 5 to 8 years with the EPA and emission standards and just the crackdown on the performance industry, both gas and diesel. it's really difficult for a manufacturer, pretty much impossible these days for a manufacturer to offer a product that's not at least 49 state reasonable basis certified, and in best case CARB certified. Because if you don't have that, you're going to have the government breathing down your neck and asking questions, and before long you're in trouble. So, it really took us back. That was another reason why we went back to the drawing board several years ago and redesigned our intakes, because without a reasonable basis emissions test, you're just waiting for the day to get your door knocked on and get in trouble, because they're going to ask you, does this require tuning? If so, then you got to sell it with tuning, and you got to show me that it's emissions compliant. So, as Nick mentioned, we kind of had a group effort between him and I, and we had this test lab going, and that gave us the ability to essentially put a 49 state reasonable basis on every product that we've redesigned and offer for sale now, so we can confidently, so dealers like you can confidently sell it and not be worried about selling a product that isn't legal or isn't affecting emissions output.
Okay. And then Nick, how about for you, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk a new platform, something that Calibrated Power has not had in their product catalog.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the process now versus what it was like 15 years ago?
I would say 15 years ago, there was a lot more. What is the market pulling for? What is the market excited about? What is Nick excited about? And just kind of roll the dice on a new product and feel the market out for how that product feels.
Okay.
We could sell in small quantities.
Let's talk about the investment of, right?
Yeah,
Let's talk about a platform.
That's what I'm getting at. So let's say LML compound kit.
Okay.
Right, emissions equipped LML compound kit. It's a product that probably is going to have pretty low performance, but if we do it right, we can move the market a little bit. We can show what the market's about. We can kind of set the tone, right?
Okay.
And so when you go to market, pre EPA crackdown, right? I mean, you can basically sell, and then if the thing's moving, then you can talk about compliance after that. As long as you think you can get a reasonable basis out of the product, right? You build the product; it's not deleting any emissions equipment. It's built to be emissions equipped. It's built to pass, but it hasn't proven that it's passed. And now, since January 1st, 2021, I think it's 2021. You can't sell a new product that affects air or fuel ratio or anything in that delivery system without having a reasonable basis, without testing it. And so the cost of testing, the time it takes to test, kind of influences your decision there as a business owner. Like, how many of these things can I sell? Is that going to be worth the testing, right? I can't do custom one-off pieces for people, because I have to test those as well, and that's just not cost effective. So it forces you as a business owner to target a bigger audience and to kind of take you away from the competitive side, the one-off side, the custom side. Does that answer your question?
It does. I think too. We've had this talk in other scenarios where when you first started with tuning, right, and you went on Craigslist and put a post up like, "Hey, I'll tune your truck," and you tuned a truck, and then you ended up buying one, and you further improved your craft, right, to go to market. You don't have that luxury now in 2024 to, I think the new 3-liter is going to be a hot topic. I'm just going to buy a truck, start doing the tune, baseline it, sell it, right? It doesn't work that way. Now there's more hurdles that need to overcome for that to be the case, with the testing. Yeah,
I mean, you need to build a tune that you think is going to be long-term reliable, make the power it's supposed to make, and by the way, it has to pass all the readiness tests, and it has to pass the USO 6 and the FTP 75, and it has to do it before you go to market, man.
Those are just letters, man. I don't know what.
Yeah, so it's drive cycle tests, right? So the truck has to go on the dyno, it has to run through the EPA drive cycles, and it has to show that it can, with a reasonable basis, that it does not pollute more than the factory did before you modified it.
Now, here's a good question. If there's a test on a truck that Jason over at Wherli Custom Fab is going to do for an intake, intercooler pipes, Y-bridge, all these cool things that they have, versus Calibrated Power for a turbocharger or a tune pack, do the tests differ? Do they vary? Or is it the same constant test and you're just testing those parts that are changed?
That's a good question. As a business owner, you want to be able to sell each part individually.
Okay.
So it's important that each part gets tested as an independent variable, and by that I mean it's the only thing changed on a stock truck.
Okay.
Right. So the intake that Wherli sells, and stop me if I'm speaking too much for you here, Wherli. I would say that you would want to test that on a truck that is not tuned, that has no other modifications. So you can say,
we do all of our testing on our own stock truck.
Okay.
Right.
But it's the same test.
It's the same test.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the FTP 75, it's the USO 6, and it's the readiness test. And really, the readiness test is probably the biggest pain in the ass. Okay. Because these I mean, how long did the last Dodge test, the last Ram test that you did, Wherli, how long did it take before the truck went through regen? Was it 500, 1,000 miles?
The Ram has proved to be one of the most difficult ones to reset all the readiness monitors. And when we were doing our 5th gen intake testing, I think we had 700 or 800 miles racked up before it finally passed all the monitors, and we were able to get it back on the dyno to do the drive cycle test.
So there's a week or two of testing, right? Driving. And then it might set a check engine light at 650 miles.
And then you have to redo it all
and then you gotta figure out why, redesign it, come back to the table, run it again. And so, yeah. I mean
that's even putting out that R&D that much further, though, at that point.
It's not so much the money, it's the time, too, right? So, I mean, it's 2 weeks to put 600 miles on a truck for me. And if it fails, then it's another week of redesign. It's another week of build. And so a month goes by in no time. It's a blink of an eye.
Nothing's been done.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I would
it's
say
not uncommon for a new product these days to take 6 months to a year just between design, fitment, testing, and then the process of the emissions testing.
Okay.
Yeah, the iterative process of emissions testing.
Now, Jason, as far as going into 2024 and kind of new truck development, new platform, what are you gauging your energy and investment into the business for new products going into this year?
So for WCFab, we've actually, we've got really good coverage on the Duramax. Obviously, we've been known as a Duramax shop forever. That's how we started. Same as Nick, and then slowly over time, you kind of started diving into the other brands. Up until about 4 or 5 years ago, we had some Cummins product, but not a full line. I would say today we've got a pretty well full line of Cummins product from your 3rd gen, from 03, 04 all the way up to 2023. So the Cummins and the GM are pretty well covered, and for years we've been getting requests from all the Ford guys, for the Power Stroke owners. When are you going to bring your product to the Ford group? All the Ford guys are looking for the same stuff, and we've just been putting it off forever, just haven't had the time or the resources, and finally actually got a truck from Calibrated, one of their test vehicles, about a year ago now almost. We got ourselves a 22 Power Stroke, and we've been working for the last 6 or 8 months on a whole product line for the 6.7 Power Stroke, and I'm actually driving one right now, and it's got some prototype development product on it that we've been running for about 3 or 4 months now. We're working on the emissions testing part of it, and we're pretty excited to launch a whole product line for the 20 plus 6.7 Power Stroke crowd sometime this year.
So, Wherli, when you say a new product line, don't keep the customers waiting. I mean, what does a full product line of 6.7 Power Stroke stuff look like? What parts exactly are you guys focusing on first?
So I would say it's very similar to what you see on our Duramax and Cummins line. The first one we developed is an intake system. We've got a full set of intercooler pipes. We're working on a high flow Y bridge. It's actually the largest Y bridge on the market, or will be the largest Y bridge on the market for the 6.7. Larger than any other offering out there, flows better than any other offering out there currently. Working on an upgraded intercooler. We've got your typical dress-up items that you see a lot of from WCFab, which is, your upper coolant pipe assembly, coolant tank, battery box, battery tray assembly, because the 20 plus, the battery tray and the coolant tank is one big assembly. So when we went to the drawing board to design that, it actually turned into one whole fabricated unit. So the coolant tank and battery tray are one big assembly. Brake cover, just your fancy bolt-on parts. So you got some underhood bling along with your performance upgrades. So again, very similar product line to what we've offered for years on the Duramax and Cummins.
Yeah. Well, that's a good news for the Power Stroke crew. I know I personally have talked a few GM and Dodge owners into driving the new Power Stroke 2020 Plus. It's one of my favorite platforms, honestly. The 10-speed and the power delivery on those trucks is gnarly. So
we've always made comments, right? Like the Ford is probably your most complete truck, right? It's something that we've always talked about internally, and it's there's the least to fix, from a calibration end of things.
Well, they start with the most power.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. No, and the refinement that they have is definitely a little bit ahead from, what we've seen in the GM and the Cummins.
I've never been a huge Ford guy myself, but I will say it is one of my more favorite trucks these days. I do drive it quite often.
The pain in your voice.
You hear me say
that.
that.
He's really struggling to get those words out.
The pain in your voice, but I get a lot of feedback from... I get a lot of feedback similar to that from end users and shop owners. It's, hey, I've always been Cummins oriented, but I got behind the wheel of a new Ford, and it's really difficult to look past once I've been behind the driver's seat of one.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we're spending time on the new Ford turbocharger as well.
Yeah. Well, that was going to be the next thing, right? So, as Jason, kind of identified where some of the growing opportunities are in WCFab, what does the future 2024 and beyond look like for CPS?
Yeah, I was excited to hear Wherli's working on some intercooler stuff because, the turbocharger side, we're going to continue to push on, and these trucks are running boost levels now that are requiring coolant-filled compressor covers from the factory in the HO variant, right? So, they're making almost 460, 470 horsepower on our dyno baseline, which is insane. Which is just a rowdy number for a stock truck. And the amount of heat that they're generating in the process is considerable also. We tried a prototype version of a Stealth Turbo for a 2020 Plus Power Stroke. I want to say it picked up 6 or 7 horsepower. It just wasn't enough for what we were doing, so we went back to the drawing board. Much like our L5P, we've designed a custom nozzle ring assembly for the new Power Stroke and a new turbine. So done a bunch of redesign on the internals of the turbocharger that will work from 2020 up to 2023 HO. Okay. So we're targeting everything.
Now, as far as the vane side of things and the exhaust side of things, is that similar to what you would see out of like an L5P style turbocharger or an older style Duramax VGT? Like, what's the landscape of the exhaust housing?
I would say the new Power Stroke is a Garrett variant.
Okay.
It looks very similar to the L5P on the inside.
Okay.
It has kind of an interesting angle to the vanes, which I haven't seen in anything else. It's called a DA-VNT double axle, and basically it allows the vane to be a lot thinner than what you've seen in the LLY and the LBZ trucks.
Okay.
And that thinner vane, I suspect, allows them to use smaller parts and just kind of tighten everything up and achieve same or higher airflow numbers in a smaller package.
Interesting.
Which is kind of the direction the factory's been going this whole time, is smaller, lighter, better design.
Of course. You've seen that with all three brands over the years.
Mm-hmm. So I'm really excited. This first one will be a bigger compressor, bigger turbine, and slightly bigger nozzle assembly. So a lot of money in R&D and design into this thing for a bump in power. So we'll see how much
There's probably going to be a collab of some sort with the Wehrli.
I would certainly like to put Wherli's high flow parts on this thing. I mean, the interesting thing about this 2023 HO is this thing's putting out that big power, and we're getting discharge temps probably approaching 400 degrees.
Oh, wow.
With that compressor cover cooled like that. That's the only reason I can think to kind of do that. So I mean, I'm sure intercooler upgrades and high flow pipes and stuff will definitely come in handy. Yeah, what were you going to say, Wherli? Sorry.
We'll have to get you guys some prototype parts up there soon.
Absolutely, yeah.
This is what the podcast brings, ideas like this.
Well, we've been sled pulling that 17 regular cab truck for a few years now, and it's been doing really well. But I would love to move that 17 out of the stable and switch to a 2020 Plus and start leaning on that new transmission and the new Power Stroke.
I knew a guy that sold one about a year ago. That's just crazy.
Yeah.
Nice. Jason, you going to sell that truck soon or what? We're going to do a tradesy back or what?
Maybe not yet, but something could happen in the future.
I think we got to keep one stock for testing. That'll be Wherli's, and then we got one for performance.
The one here will be the fun truck. Jason's is the stock. Sorry, Jason, we're done.
That's all right. That's all right.
Oh, very cool. Well, Jason, anything that you could think of that maybe we didn't touch on for the listeners?
No, I mean, that wraps up the 6.7 is going to be a big release for us this year. Early on in the podcast, you mentioned came up and did the dealer training a few months back. Showed you guys some of our new cast components. Most of them being updated, redesigned versions of existing product that we just went back to the drawing board on and improved, made it work better with factory components, made it work without any requirement for tuning, and still have an increase in airflow. Talking about LBZ intake horns, LML intake horns. We've got an LML 3-inch high flow Y bridge that's going to be getting released here really soon. That's emissions compliant, compatible with all the OEM components. It'll be the only Y bridge on the market for the LML that's bolt on, no tuning required, and it's huge. It's a really nice piece.
I will say I've seen this thing, and it's you can tell somebody sat in front of a computer for a couple weeks and tried to get every ounce of airflow out of some of these parts. There's really some investment of time in these things. So if you haven't seen any of these parts, I would definitely encourage you guys to check out Wherli's website.
We went through a few spools of plastic on the 3D printer, printing prototypes.
Oh, wow.
We're hoping to have quite a few of these new products on display at UCC a couple months out, obviously, from the Ultimate Call-Out Challenge in Indianapolis, the first weekend in June, I believe it is. So make sure, stop by our booth. I know Calibrated's always set up out there too. Not sure if they'll have the new 6.7 turbo on display or not, but we'll have a bunch of new products, and we'll have our Ford in the booth, likely with our whole product line on it. So yeah, we'll have a whole lot of new stuff on display. If you make it to any events that we attend, you'll be able to see all that stuff this year.
Yeah, well, it's great to hear that. It's encouraging that when I talk to Wherli about these new parts and everything new coming out, and you get slapped on the wrist by the EPA, and it's nice to see the business bounce back. It's nice to see you guys take that and move forward with it, Wherli. I don't just mean that as an ass kisser. Like, it's nice to see the industry taking that stance. It can be it can really slow you down mentally to have to deal with all that shit, right? And then to come back and be able to design parts and test them and prove that they work and come back to the market and still be successful in your mission is an accomplishment. And I would like to just say that I recognize that, and I'm impressed. Yeah,
you and me both have had to deal with that for quite a long time now, and we made the smart choice as business owners. We both got full shops of employees. We got to look out for, and can't make poor decisions. And
yep.
We're back to the drawing board, and we reinvested a lot of time and effort. And we're excited to be bringing product to market that's compliant, and we've got a lot of happy customers. There's guys out there that might complain that we don't make some of our old product anymore, and wish that we did. But once you get your hands on some of our new stuff, I think you'll be just as satisfied or more satisfied compared to some of our older stuff.
Absolutely. Cool. I think that's a good point to...
Well, to any of our listeners, right?
Yeah.
Jason, you're going to have updates on some of this stuff on your social media and website, things like that, correct?
Yeah. If you follow our social channels, I don't have it, but I know we have TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. You follow those three places. You sign up for our newsletter on the homepage of our website. We're pretty religious on sending out a newsletter every month, which talks about new product. And then come to shows. I mean, we hit 10, 15 events a year across the Midwest, truck pulls, drag race events, trade shows, and you're bound to be the first to see new product at any of those events.
Cool. Well, Jason, we appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much. For our listeners, this is Chris.
And I'm Nick Priegnitz.
And thanks for listening.
Thanks for joining us today, guys. This has been Paul Wilson.
And Chris Ehmke.
Make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Nick, what are you doing in here today?